It is time for my February wrap-up. We're going to be talking about all the books that I read in February, which is 8 books. I read 8, well, 2 of them were novellas, so 6 books and 2 novellas. Here they are on screen, a decent variety in genre with, of course, fantasy and sci-fi leaning. I enjoyed most of what I read this month, and I will share ratings with you at the end of the video after we give brief descriptions of each. As always, I do reading vlogs every single week, so if you want more in-depth thoughts on any of these books, I will direct you towards reading vlogs where I usually spend a good amount of time with each one, but this will be a quick wrap-up video, you know, the purpose of a wrap-up. Sadly, we're starting this video out because I do these wrap-ups chronologically. Sadly, we're starting out on a negative note because the first book that I read this month was unfortunately also my least favorite book of the month, and that was Into the Wild, which is a nonfiction. I'll preface this by saying a lot of people like this book, and when I talked about it in the reading vlog, I got very mixed comments on it. Some people who said, yeah, I felt the same way as you, I had the same problems as you did, and then plenty of people who also said, no. Don't like your take. So this book has clearly been meaningful to a lot of people, so all I can do is give you my perspective on it, and then you should also go look into other people's perspectives because it has been a great book for a lot of people. So Into the Wild is a nonfiction following Christopher McCandless, who is a young man who gave away his savings to charity and abandoned most of his possessions and then goes into the wild to forge a new path for himself, a new life for himself on his own. And tragically, months later, his body was found, and this is the story of him setting out on his journey, the people that he met along the way, the decisions that he made, the one fatal, innocent mistake that he made trying to survive that ended up costing him his life, as well as a ton of interviews and observations that come alongside of it. So this had potential to be something that I would absolutely love. Most nonfictions that I read are survival stories or rescue stories. I love stories about people setting off to accomplish something and then either making it out, figuring out how to survive in seemingly impossible situations, or being rescued. And many times in these stories, it does not pan out well for everyone in the story. Many times it doesn't have a happy ending. So everything about this, when I checked this out from the library, everything about this seemed like something that I would like. There were 2 main things that kept me from liking it. One was just how meandering it was. I think that this story is probably much shorter than the page numbers, and so there was a lot of side tangenting. There was a lot of, this person also went on an adventure at some point, and this person also had an experience similar to this, and also I can relate because of here are my experiences. And personally, I love a good nonfiction telling someone's story, but too often I find stories that end up not having enough story to fill the pages, and so it just kind of goes off everywhere and loses its focus. Maybe that's a me problem, but I've come across several nonfictions that do this, and this is one of them, and I really lost interest when there was just a huge block of this book that was going off into a bunch of kind of similar stories, but not the one that I set out to read about. And the other problem I had with this book, and this is the problem that some people related to and said I came away with the same experience, and some people came back and said, no, that is not the experience I had. This is the take that was a little bit controversial in the comment section of my vlog, and that's that I felt that the narrative of this book romanticized Christopher's decisions and his quest and his going out into the wild completely unprepared. What he did was he went out in a circumstance where he had very, very, very little to survive. I think it was a 20-pound bag of rice and a gun that would not help him with the kind of game that he was going to go up against in this circumstance that he was in, as well as people telling him, listen, you will not survive this. You are not prepared. You are not trained for this. I live in this area. This is not going to pan out. And his response was just, I think I can handle it. I think I can handle anything that the wild throws my way. And there was a sense of wonder in the narrative structure, in the way this whole thing was painted, was like, look at this innate desire to go and to find yourself and to discover and to survive. And because it's such a tragic story. And I did get a comment that said you missed empathy in your reading of the story. And I do think I had empathy. I found Christopher's story extremely tragic. But I also felt like there was a sense of wonder and wow, look at what he accomplished, even though it has a sad ending in the narrative structure of this story. And I personally didn't jive with that sort of tone for this story. Other people disagree, and that's cool, but that was the way that I felt about it. I do think that if you watch the movie first, which I haven't seen, but quite a few people mentioned watching the movie first really helped them enjoy the novel more because they were already invested and they already really just had experienced a story in one way and wanted to experience it another, which I think is very valid. But anyway, I didn't end up liking this book. Plenty of people do though, so check out other people's opinions. Next thing I read was Chess Story. This has been on my bookshelves for so long and I finally got to it and it was incredible. This is a tiny little novella by an Austrian author and this opens up with a game of chess. A professional chess player on a ship who is commissioned to play a group of people, and eventually we find that there's one bystander who is incredible at chess, and so it escalates to these two, this professional and this seemingly, how could you possibly give this professional a run for your money person playing against each other, and the competition is good. And then we get into the backstory of this random chess player who happens to be extraordinary, and we learn how he gained this skill. We learn about how he was put in isolation. He was given isolation torture under the Nazi regime, and he was able to survive this isolation by stealing a book, any book, and it happened to be a book on the rules of chess, and then letting chess take over his every waking moment, his very being, so that he had something to fixate on, something to survive for. I think what made this so extraordinary was the intention in detail. It was even down to the initial chess game at the beginning of the story, which I don't play chess, I don't even know the rules of chess, and yet I was so gripped because of the way it was written, because of the intensity of the moment, the intensity written into the moment, and then that carried right over when we got into the flashback and we looked at this isolation torture and we looked at the every thought that went through this man's mind as he was watching a raindrop go down the window or focusing on the buttons of a coat, anything that he could fixate on to survive this extreme isolation. That intensity written into these seemingly mundane details are what made this story so personal, so close, and so emotionally effective. It had sort of an abrupt end, but I don't care. I absolutely loved this little novella, and I will read it again. Next up is Into the Sunken City. This is a YA novel. I'm trying to read more YA so I can chat with my nieces about what I read, or rather what they read. This takes place in a future Arizona where the rain has just never stopped falling. It is perpetually falling, and because of that, so much of the land in the US has sunken, and that has altered everything for those who live in this time period, to include how they survive and how little they have to survive off of. So Jin, her father was a diver and he got trapped under a sunken building and he died. So now Jin is left to take care of herself and her younger sister alone. She too is passionate about diving, but there's a lot of grief and trauma wrapped up in that, and she's just trying to get one treasure, one thing that could help them to have enough to survive and to send her sister to school so that she could have a chance at a future. Enter the chance to get one score that could set them for life. And so Jin has to go diving again, but she's also diving with a crew of people that she may not have chosen. She doesn't want her sister to be in danger. She doesn't want to be diving with her ex-boyfriend, where there's a whole bunch of angst going on. This is such an adventure. I love every single part of this book that includes diving, or at least every scene, not every part It really bothers me that no one got the bends even though they would shoot up from hundreds of feet and there was no explanation of why. I fixated on that a little bit in the vlog. But I loved every scene of diving because it was so detailed and it was so beautifully described. And I enjoyed so much of the adventure of this story. I think it was beautifully written. I think that some of the settings that we got to experience and some of the high tension things that we went through when pirates would arrive, when we were being manipulated, when plans seemed to be going well and then they would shift in an instant. So much of this story was so fun. It definitely had its fair share of angst with the ex-boyfriend and Jin, but also I don't think that the angst overtook the adventure of the story or the focus on grief and on sisterly love and on Jin's need to protect her sister at all costs. I ended up giving this 4 stars specifically because of the world building. There's so much about this world, about the rain never ending the rain falling being a never ending thing, how that affects culture, how that affects the ways that people interact, the way that people survive, the way the world has evolved. I really wanted to see what kind of inventions have been created under this distress to help them to survive more, what kind of community has been culminated. I wanted explanations about this rain falling, not just theories. I wanted this world. The world felt cardboard. It felt like a strong gust of wind would knock it over. And it was such a fascinating world as far as the world building, not as far as the setting. The setting was rich, but the world building, how this catastrophe has actually affected the world in day-to-day ways, I didn't get. And that was what I was so deeply craving from this novel. So I want to be clear, I enjoyed this so much, but I wish there were at least 50 more pages to just flesh out the world and the implications of what was happening rather than what was happening, just sort of being the conduit of the adventure. Does that make sense? I really enjoyed this though. Next is another novella, and it's And Put Away Childish Things. This was so fun. I didn't think it was going to be at first because it started, okay, so it starts at COVID. So it's our world in 2020. And it's depressing. And I personally don't want to go back there. So I have avoided novels set. Like I've avoided COVID novels. So getting several chapters starting there just was not my favorite thing. But then we found our doorway. So this follows, I don't remember his name. Hang on. Harry. His name's Harry. This follows Harry, whose grandmother wrote a very successful children's doorway series. And Harry is trying to make his own career, trying to make his own life for things, and it's not going so well. And then he finds his doorway and steps into his grandmother's world, Underhill. Except that it's not quite right. So at first, I didn't love the beginning of this book because of the setting as well as because it really just read derivative. There were so many things taking from Narnia and taking from other famous series similar that it seemed like you were just pulling from those other series instead of doing a portal fantasy. And I was not enjoying it at all, but that was just the beginning. Those were just playful nods, and then it does its own thing. And I would say that if you're a fan of The Magicians, which I am, this is a great comp title because he gets into his Underhill, but it is rotting. It is dying. It was supposed to be alive, like his grandmother wrote it, but it's been waiting for its prince, Harry, to come, and it doesn't look the way he saw it as a kid reading about it. It doesn't look the way he always imagined it. The characters are all there. Everything's familiar, but it's rotting. And so now it's, okay, this is not the world that I knew as a child. These are not the characters that I knew as a child as I knew them, but it's still my world. They're still my characters. So do I still have a responsibility to them? Harry himself goes through a great change in the story, and learns so much, as well as the world around him going through great changes as well. It was such a quick read. It was such a funny and engaging read, as well as at times very creepy in a charming way, if that makes sense. And I enjoyed it. I enjoyed it so much. Then I read book 9 in the Dresden Files, and this one follows a string of murders that Harry is investigating always. This time it is a series of what appears to be suicides, but in fact there's a calling card for Harry. There's a pattern. It's clearly intentional, even though on the surface that's not how it looks, and we realize that it's a serial killer, and Harry has to investigate and figure it out. He has a new apprentice under him. We see a lot of familiar faces, and it's a Dresden book. Unfortunately, it was a weaker Dresden book for me. It was probably in the lower half of the Dresden books, so it wasn't one that I had a load to say about, even though I did do a spoiler review for it, because I'm far enough in the series that in order to talk about them with any sort of depth whatsoever, we just have to get into spoilers. So it did get a spoiler review, so if you care about the series, there you go. But it was just kind of middle of the road for me. There was a lot that it did that was interesting, but there was a lot that it did that just didn't do a ton. I called it a bridge book in that review. I think that there's probably plenty that the series will use to build, so not the most engaging in the moment, but we can revisit it later. There were a couple of phenomenal scenes in it, though, just not necessarily a phenomenal book overall for me. And finally, oh good, okay, what a great way to end my month. Finally, I binge read the Annihilation Trilogy. Currently, it's a trilogy. There's a 4th book being written right now. So this was not my intent. I planned on rereading Annihilation and then reading book 2 this month, and then I was going to read book 3 in March, but I accidentally let it just take over my whole life, and I did a dedicated video for that as well. This video had spoiler-free thoughts as well as spoiler thoughts, so it's free for all if you want to watch it. It's actually it's probably my favorite video that I've made in a while, just because I had so much fun giving in to the obsession. Annihilation, after this reread, is now probably one of my top 5 books of all time. I want to read it again now. Actually, as soon as I finish it, I wanted to turn around and start the reread and forget about reading the sequels, because I love this book so dearly. But I'm glad I continued on, because just letting my obsession for this series take me over and let it disrupt my end of month TBR and give over multiple days to just nothing but these books was the most satisfying and fun thing. And then to document all of that, it was so much fun to do. Rarely does a series just take me like this trilogy did. So Annihilation follows a character who is in the 12th expedition that goes into Area X. Area X is a space that arrived seemingly overnight and took over this town, and it's full of impossible anomalies. So our main character is a biologist, and she's part of the 12th expedition that goes in to Area X to try to understand it, because Area X seems to be expanding. So it is a threat. We need to understand what's going on here before it expands too far. So the government has been sending these expeditions in, and each expedition has come back either dead or alive, but a shell of who they once were. So our biologist is a part of the 12th expedition, and we go in with her and we see what this place is. And it's just so full of suspense and of unexplainable happenings. It's confusing and it's odd, and you leave with more questions than answers. Book 2 follows a government agent who is conducting interviews, going through files, compiling information, trying to understand Area X, because they need to figure it out before it takes over. And then book 3, we're going back into the belly of the beast, baby. This time following multiple perspectives that we've collected over the series of these two books, and it's very timey-wimey, wibbly-wobbly. We're going back to the beginning of Area X to see its origins and how it's transformed people over time, and we're seeing other characters. We have multiple timelines and multiple perspectives, and it's wild. This is not a trilogy to go into if you want answers, because it doesn't provide them all, and it shouldn't. This is not the kind of series that should end on all the answers. It should end a mystery because of what this trilogy is. So don't expect to get all the answers, but do expect to get a trip and maybe to come out of it saying, okay, but what did I just read? I can't express to you how much fun I had reading through this trilogy and just letting it be my obsession. So those are the books that I read this month. If you care about star ratings, here's some ratings for everything that I read. Overall, I had a really positive month. I very much enjoyed a lot of what I read. I had some great reads, as well as a couple that didn't work out for me. If you're curious, this is my TBR for March. I know March has already started, but you know, here it is. And if you want to talk to me about any of these books in the comments, I would love to chat with you more about them. As always, check out some vlogs if you want more thoughts on anything that I talked about here today. There's also the spreadsheet, always linked in the description, if you want to go look at many books that I've read and the videos connected to them. But thanks for watching. Please do chat with me more in the comments. I'll see you again soon. Bye.